So what's up guys, I'm Marco and today I'm going to be talking about my topic which is preservance of life and interdependence. All the things that I have, all the info that I have is from the research that I performed prior to making this speech. I have all my references and sources at the end of the video and I think I'm good to go. So without further ado, let's get started. So now guys, I'm going to be dividing my speech into three categories. The first category would be the animal and plant reproduction. The second category would be about DNA and the inheritance of traits. The third category would be about the biotic potential and the environmental resistance that affects the perpetuation of life of organisms. So without further ado, let's get started for real this time. So let's start it off with our first category, which is plants and animal reproduction. So let's start it off with the plant reproduction. Plants are living things, so this means that they must be bred to pass on their genes to future generations of the same species. Plants can produce offspring through either sexual or asexual reproduction. DNA from two parents is required for sexual reproduction. Gametes or sexual cells are found in parent plants. Gametes from both sexes mix their genetic material to create children. Fertilization is the term for this procedure. Pollination, the act of sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Stamens and pistils are the names for the female and male genitalia, respectively, of flowers. The portion of the stamen that houses the pollen is called the anther. This pollen must go to the stigma, a component of the pistil. So plants are either self-pollinated or cross-pollinated. Self-pollination occurs when the plant's own pollen fertilizes its own ovules. Cross-pollination occurs when the wind or animals move pollen from one plant to fertilize the ovules of another plant. The advantage of cross-pollination is that it promotes genetic diversity, and some plants have traits that prevent self-pollination from occurring at different times, such as pollen and ovules, its own pollen and ovules. Asexual reproduction requires DNA from only one parent. It produces offspring that are genetically identical to the parent. These offsprings are called clones. Clones lack genetic diversity. This makes them more susceptible to illness. Also, it becomes more difficult for them to adapt to changes in the environment. So for the next mode of asexual reproduction, it is called the vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation does not require seeds or spores. Instead, offspring grows apart from their mother plant, and in different plants, vegetative propagation occurs in different ways. So now let's move on to the animal reproduction. So animals produce sexually. Sexual reproduction begins with the union of sperm and egg in a process called fertilization. This can occur either outside or inside the female. The type of fertilization varies from animal to animal. Some species release the egg and sperm into the environment. Aquatic species like fish and sea anemones are some examples of animals who undergo this type of fertilization. Others retain the egg and take the sperm into the female's body and eject the shell-developing embryo. Animals who undergo this process are called oviparous animals. Examples of oviparous species are birds, frogs, and turtles. On the other hand, viviparous animals retain the developing offspring during the gestation period. Mammals such as humans, dogs, cats, lions, and cows undergo this kind of fertilization. So now we are done with our first category, which is plants and animal reproduction. So we're now going to proceed to our second category, which is about DNA and trait inheritance. So let's get started. Parents pass on traits such as eye color and blood type to their children through genes. Some health conditions and diseases can also be inherited genetically. Each variation of a gene is called an allele. These two copies of a gene are contained in your chromosomes and influence how your cells work. The most common interaction between alleles is the dominant and recessive relationship. An allele of a gene is said to be dominant if it effectively overrules the other allele. Eye color and blood groups are examples of relationships between dominant and recessive genes. So moving on further to our second category, which is the DNA. So now we're going to discuss how the DNA allow the transfer of genetic information. So according to the National Library of Medicine, it consists of two major steps. It's the transcription and the translation process. It's collectively called the gene expression. During the transcription process, the information stored in the gene's DNA is passed to a similar molecule called RNA, which stands for ribonucleic acid, in the cell's nucleus. Both RNA and DNA are made up of chains of building blocks called the nucleotides, but have slightly different chemical properties. The type of RNA that carries the information to make the proteins is called the messenger RNA or mRNA. Excuse me. This is to carry information or messages from DNA from the nucleus to the cytoplasm. The second step, which is the translation from gene to protein. This process takes place in the cytoplasm. mRNAs interact with specialized complexes called ribosomes that read the sequence of mRNA nucleotides. Each sequence of 3 nucleotides is called a codon, usually codes for a specific amino acid. A type of RNA, called transfer RNA or tRNA, assembles the amino acids of proteins amino acid by amino acid. Protein assembly continues until the ribosomes encounter a stop codon. So, going on further, now we are going to discuss how DNA produces proteins in the body. The information for making proteins is encoded in the cell's DNA. When a protein is made, a copy of DNA is made, and that copy is delivered to the ribosome. Ribosomes read the information in the mRNA and use that information to assemble the amino acids into proteins. So now we are going to answer a question that even I am really curious about in the beginning. Can DNA be manipulated? So let's proceed. According to the National Human Genome Research Institute, genetic engineering is the process of altering DNA composition of living organisms using laboratory-based techniques. This involves changing a single base pair, deleting a region of DNA, or adding a new segment of DNA. For example, genetic engineering can involve adding genes from one species to an organism from another species to create a desired trait. Genetic engineering is used in research and industry to treat cancer, brew yeast, and produce genetically modified plants and livestock. So moving further in our DNA category, we are now going to answer the question, are genetically modified organisms exist or are they really true? So now we're going to answer this question. The first, I'm really curious about this. This is a cool topic. This is a fresh territory for me. So I know probably you guys too have never heard of genetically modified organisms before. So now let's tackle this. According to the National Geographic Society, most genetically modified organisms are presumably found in the agricultural industry. In the middle of the 1990s, the first GM crops intended for human consumption were released. In today's market, for corn and soybeans and sugar beets contains almost 90% GMOs. Higher yields, longer lifespans, increased pest and disease resistance, and improved flavor are all characteristics of genetically engineered plants. Both farmers and consumers will benefit from these advantages. For instance, consumers can save money due to increased yields and longer shelf lives. Farmers can grow better harvests with fewer pesticide purchases and applications thanks to pest-resistant crops, and as a result, compared to conventionally grown crops, GMO crops may be more environmentally benign. So moving on further to our DNA category, we're now going to discuss the benefits of genetically modified organisms. According to the National Library of Medicine, the U.S. National Library of Medicine, the following are potential advantages of genetic engineering. Food are more nourished with nutrients, meals are more delicious, plants obtain the ability to withstand disease and drought and require fewer resources from the environment, such as water and fertilizer. Less insecticides needed to be used, higher food availability, cheaper food products, and a longer shelf life. Animals and plants grow quicker, food with better qualities, such potatoes that fry up with less of a chemical that causes cancer. So now moving on to our DNA category, we're now going to discuss the risks of genetically modified organisms. According to medical news today, since the use of genetically modified food is still relatively new, its long-term safety implications are still unclear. Human health is a major concern with regard to drawbacks. The health effects of GMO foods have not yet been proven by scientists, however, work is being done in the area. There is a slight chance that eating foods that have undergone genetic alteration will result in an allergic reaction. However, this only occurs if the genetic change results in the creation of an allergen. So now guys, we are done with our DNA category. We're now moving on to our next category, which is discussing the biotic potential and environmental resistance that affects the perpetuation of life for organisms. So there are large differences between species in biological potential. Many large mammals, such as humans and elephants, produce only one offspring per year, while some smaller organisms, such as insects, produce thousands of offsprings per year. Organisms tend to not reach their full biological potential because most species do not live in ideal environmental conditions. At some point, population growth is hampered by predators, disease, environmental changes, lack of available food, or a combination of these factors. The maximum number of a given species that can be sustained by a resource in a given environment is the species carrying capacity, a concept often debated along with the biological potential. As the population approaches capacity, the amount of resources consumed equals the amount of resources produced. At this point, individuals will start competing. Some die due to lack of resources, others may not regenerate, conditions are no longer ideal. And as an outcome, it prevents these individuals from reaching their full biological potential. So yeah guys, I'm gonna end the speech right here. I hope y'all learned something from me, especially from the genetic engineering part. It's a fresh topic for me, so I really don't know much about it, but thanks to my research, I've discovered a lot of things from it, and especially to the EM. So y'all stay safe, and I'm gonna see you next time. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for listening to me. Bye!